Fresh developments in the shuttle disaster. NASA is looking hard at the solid rockets, and the president is considering an outside commission to investigate the disaster.
NBC Nightly News with Tom Brokaw.
Good evening. It now appears that NASA is concentrating on one specific area in its investigation of the violent explosion that destroyed the shuttle Challenger and killed all 7 on board. NBC's Jay Barbary, who has covered every NASA launch over the last 28 years, has learned exclusively that one of the solid rocket boosters may be the chief culprit. Jay, what have you learned tonight?
Tom, they're concentrating on these solid rocket boosters. They're shipped here from the plant in 4 segments, and they're put together here. And the area in which they're concentrating on is called a fill joint splice. This fill joint splice, they suspect, sprung a leak and served like a blowtorch to heat the big tank here that exploded and consumed the astronauts. Now, we can see this on tape that we have from this side, pictures that we have from this side that NASA gave to us at the time of the launch. You can see this hot spot developing up here just a third of the way down from the nose of the shuttle itself. We're waiting for it to come up here. There it is. There's the hot spot. It served as a blowtorch from the seam, from this leak in the solid booster rocket, and at 6,000 degrees, then it erupted and consumed the spacecraft.
That would have been the solid rocket booster that we could not see on the far side. One peeled away and then it was later exploded. Isn't that correct?
That's correct, Tom.
And where do they go from here in their investigation?
The investigation continues, Tom. They are not at all certain this is it. This is the leading suspect at the moment. They feel that they have good evidence that they should concentrate on this area, that the solid rocket did spring a leak, served as a 6,000 degree blowtorch, and erupted the big, huge external fuel tank.
Thank you very much, Jay Barbary, tonight at Cape Canaveral. Meanwhile, NASA is continuing other aspects of its investigation at sea and on land. NBC's chief science correspondent Robert Bazell is in Cape Canaveral with that part of the story now.
Pieces of the Challenger continued to wash up on the beaches near Cape Canaveral today. There was one particularly disturbing finding.
A bone and tissue fragment measuring approximately 4 by 6 inches by 1 inch was found on the beach in the Atlantic.
The bone was taken to the hospital at Patrick Air Force Base for identification. NASA officials emphasized there was no proof yet it was the remains of a crew member. Ships and aircraft continued to search the area of the crash. Late today, the Coast Guard said it had found a large object underwater, possibly the fuselage. The search yesterday centered on the impact area, but today it was expanded as strong currents carried floating pieces in several directions. The search recovered some large pieces, including a control panel from the shuttle's crew compartment. At the Marshall Space Flight Center in Alabama, engineers examined engines looking for any possible defect. They also looked at the external fuel tank. During launch, this tank contains liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen. It was this tank which exploded, destroying the Challenger. What caused it to blow up is the mystery. Workers here heard from the center director.
And we must leave no stone unturned.
At the Johnson Space Center in Houston, technicians continue to pore over the outputs from the shuttle's computers, 1,000th of a second at a time, trying to find any indication that anything was different from normal. And in Florida and Texas, scientists and engineers looked at tapes of the explosion. From this camera angle, the only one available to television networks, vapors can be seen on the other side near the now suspect solid rocket booster. Here is a comparison of Tuesday's launch with a normal one last October. NASA investigators now have pictures from the other side showing the suspect rocket just before the explosion. Those pictures have given them the strongest clues so far. Robert Bazell, NBC News, Cape Canaveral.
And when we continue here in just a moment, memorial services for the lost astronauts, some questions about Star Wars now, and some tough talk about the United States from President Marcos of the Philippines. The whole nation remains in mourning for the 7 people who died in the shuttle disaster. The husband of Christa McAuliffe, the school teacher, issued a statement today on behalf of himself and his children, thanking this country for its sympathy and concern. He said, "We have all lost Christa." Christa McAuliffe's parents attended a memorial service for her today at her alma mater, Framingham State College in Massachusetts. Her friends remembered her.
You were our brightest star, Christa. Your life was shortened, but but your light was oh so brilliant.
But for me, it was November 22nd, 1963, all over again. The same terrible feeling, the same awful hole in my stomach, the same waves of emotion.
Pioneers endure risks, and a special honor is reserved for those who undertake such adventures.
We ask you to hold her forever, tenderly, in the palm of your hand.
Every time we look upward, we will be remembering Christa, for she carried her love upward.
NBC's Chris Wallace reports tonight that President Reagan offered to visit Christa McAuliffe's high school in Concord, New Hampshire, where she taught, and to speak to the children there. But the high school's principal declined the offer, saying the youngsters would be better off at this time without the excitement of a presidential visit. President Reagan will be traveling to Houston tomorrow for a special NASA memorial service at the Johnson Space Center. NBC News will have live coverage of those services beginning at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Soviet condolences over the Challenger disaster began to taper off today, and in their place came new warnings against the American Star Wars space defense program. The official Kremlin media suggested that space technology is not perfect, and deployment of space weapons could lead to an accidental triggering of nuclear war. At the Pentagon, meanwhile, defense officials are calculating just how much of a setback they will suffer because of the loss of Challenger. NBC's Jim McAuliffe reports tonight that there is reason for them to be concerned.
The Defense Department is the shuttle's biggest customer. 4 military missions were set for this year, with plans for 9 a year by 1988. But Pentagon officials say the loss of Challenger will have a serious effect on military space programs. Defense Secretary Caspar Weinberger has ordered a study to determine just how serious.
We'll do the best we can to make up for it, getting what payloads we can on other vehicles, such as the old Titan missiles and things of that kind, but a lot of them were configured for the size and capacity of the shuttles.
President Reagan's Star Wars defense plan relies heavily on manned shuttle missions to conduct experiments in outer space. A lengthy delay in shuttle launches could result in a technical setback and intensify the Star Wars debate.
The shuttle accident will clearly be used by people, the detractors of the SDI, as an example that you cannot build a perfectly reliable system.
But informed sources say the most damaging blow could come to U.S. surveillance capabilities. The shuttle was scheduled to launch a new KH-12 surveillance satellite in September. An earlier spy satellite was lost last August when the Titan rocket launcher blew up shortly after takeoff, much like Challenger. One source said the loss of both satellites raises U.S. security risks. The Pentagon can use refitted Titan missiles to launch some of their smaller satellites. But a new rocket under development to carry the larger shuttle-size payloads won't be ready for 2 years.
It's so important to the military because they cannot function without the shuttle.
The military has argued for some time it needs its own space launch system as a backup to the shuttle. Unfortunately, said one official, the Challenger tragedy may prove that point. Jim McAuliffe, NBC News, the Pentagon.
The shuttle disaster poses a challenge as well for the nation's space contractors, but NBC News business correspondent Mike Jensen reports tonight that they may increase their profits.
Rockwell International took in an estimated $1 billion last year for work it did in the space shuttle program. How much will it be hurt by this week's disaster? Apparently, very little.
The big space contractors like Rockwell International are not talking, at least not on camera. They don't want to appear ghoulish or insensitive about the shuttle tragedy. But the fact is, most of the contractors do not stand to lose from it, and many of them may even increase their profits.
That's because space experts, Wall Street analysts, and aerospace contractors say they believe the destroyed Challenger will be replaced by a new shuttle at a cost of more than $2 billion.
Well, there will be the replacement of an orbiter, and NASA is going to have to pay the cost of that replacement.
Although a few contractors have been asked to delay shipments of shuttle-related products, most have not.
We anticipate delivering our existing orders. We've heard no words to the contrary.
Companies using the shuttle for commercial purposes, such as launching satellites, will be affected, but not much. GTE SpaceNet, for example, will launch its next 2 satellites using the European Space Agency's unmanned rockets, a technique many shuttle customers say the U.S. should use.
I believe there was perhaps an overemphasis on the space shuttle and its ability to do everything for everyone.
Most experts say only the discovery of a major design flaw in the destroyed shuttle, something they do not expect, would delay the program and the flow of dollars for more than a few months. Mike Jensen, NBC News, New York.
It was 11:39 a.m. Eastern Time on Tuesday morning when Challenger blew up. Now, thousands of people have decided that 1139 could have been a lucky number. They made their bets, and they made the most popular number in the New York State Lottery Tuesday and Wednesday, 1139. But all the people who bet on 1139 lost.
This is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings. Tonight, reporting from Washington.
Good evening. There are still no answers. Off the coast of Florida today and at NASA installations on Cape Canaveral and in Houston, they still cannot tell us why the shuttle Challenger suddenly exploded in midair. But tons of wreckage have been recovered from the ocean, including the nose cone of a booster rocket, a control panel, a parachute, what appears to be part of the crew compartment, and yes, some human remains. Throughout the space community, the search is as painstaking as it is painful. Here's ABC's John Quinones.
The Atlantic continues to yield more evidence from the tragedy of Challenger. Once again, police and the curious combed Cape Canaveral's beaches, and now a private citizen has found what NASA says could be the first human remains from the ill-fated shuttle.
There was a bone and tissue fragment measuring approximately 4 by 6 inches by 1 inches that was found on an India-Atlantic beach.
The remains, which reportedly appear to resemble a foot bone, have been taken to Patrick Air Force Base for analysis. NASA took to the sea today with an expanded search team, more Navy and Coast Guard vessels and Air Force aircraft, and it's paying off. This evening, a Coast Guard cutter reports finding a large piece of debris that may indeed be parts of the orbiter itself.
Located what they report to be part of the fuselage. And as was mentioned, that has not been confirmed, but that's what it looks like part of the fuselage to them. They report it as a large piece. They report seeing in the same area several other items that look to them to be parts of the cockpit. Again, that's unconfirmed, but that's what the Cutter Dallas is reporting. They also have had multiple sonar sightings in the area indicating that there is some large object or objects on the bottom of the ocean underneath that site. They have requested a NASA recovery ship to come over and send divers down to check that out.
Investigators also believe they have found what was hanging from these parachutes that floated to sea after Tuesday's explosion. 2 cone-shaped objects that may be the remains of the shuttle's solid rocket boosters. In all, thousands of pounds of debris have been recovered.
And it includes piping, it includes tiles, it includes the material that looks like panels or bulkheads. There's electronic equipment, things with wires and gauges.
All that bits and pieces of the puzzle, NASA says, but not yet enough to reconstruct Challenger.
It's tremendously difficult, and what we are dealing with is very small pieces of material and trying to identify where they came from, what part of the shuttle they came from, or even whether they came from the shuttle.
It is a puzzle that is becoming more difficult to assemble because the pieces are drifting further apart. NASA has now expanded its search zone from 5,500 to 8,000 square miles. The floating debris is being spread by winds and the Gulf Stream.
Although most of the debris has been found here in this smaller 600 square mile area of the Atlantic, this is still a vast body of water to search in. Even more difficult is the task of finding debris that has sunk 100 feet to the bottom of the ocean. Searchers are scanning the area with sonar detectors.
There is still no word on how long the tragedy of Challenger will delay the shuttle program. For now, the focus is on recovery and mourning the fallen heroes of Challenger. John Quinones, ABC News, the Kennedy Space Center.
In the terrible accident which consumed Challenger on Tuesday, 6 of the 7 astronauts on board went immediately from being relatively anonymous to men and women with whom the nation almost instantly identified. The exception, of course, was Christa McAuliffe. Because she was the teacher in space, she was always more familiar. At Concord High School in New Hampshire, where she last taught, there has been an outpouring of flowers and messages, some from as far away as Alaska, and most from other schools, from teachers and from students. Christa's husband, Steve, issued his first public statement today, speaking for himself and his 2 young children. A letter released by his law firm said, "We wish we could comfort all of you, as you have comforted each of us." One of the things that many Americans in the public eye have come to learn about, if not always accept, is the absence of privacy. On Tuesday, when the shuttle exploded, Christa McAuliffe's parents were seen by much of the nation making that painful transition from pride and joy to confusion and then to shock. They were dignified throughout. Today, they appeared in public again to make a painful visit they clearly believed was very important. ABC's John McKenzie reports from Massachusetts.
At Framingham State College, where their daughter went to school, Ed and Grace Corrigan were among friends today, among people who shared their memories and shared their grief. Only 2 days ago at Cape Canaveral, the Corrigans watched as the space shuttle, their daughter, and 6 other astronauts were blown apart in the skies above. Today, they listened with pride and pain as friends eulogized Christa Corrigan McAuliffe.
Her enthusiasm, her spirit, her dedication, and that infectious smile gave us a special feeling.
She controlled her fear as we must. She never wavered, she never retreated, and neither must we when we are confronted with a challenge.
You were our brightest star, Christa. Your life was shortened, but your light was oh so brilliant.
McAuliffe was a history major in the class of 1970. Her teachers say she was fascinated by a course called The American Frontier. As the first civilian headed for space, McAuliffe was helping to blaze a new frontier.
Pioneers endure risks, and a special honor is reserved for those who undertake such adventures.
Last Friday, students here released thousands of balloons to celebrate the shuttle mission. Today, they put up 7 balloons to mourn the loss of those on board. McAuliffe used to tell her friends and family to reach for the stars. Now in their time of sorrow, they are reaching for each other. John McKenzie, ABC News, Framingham, Massachusetts.
When we come back, all the scientific plans which are on hold and the economic impact on all the companies which either help to build or plan to use the shuttle. We are probably all familiar by now with the accelerated program for the shuttle that NASA had planned in 1986, 15 missions in all, with a very strong emphasis on space research. All that is now on indefinite hold. Here's ABC's Lynn Scher in Houston.
NASA is still counting down for the year of space science, their most ambitious launch schedule yet, with the emphasis for the first time on the stars and the planets. So the freeze on the shuttle program could be devastating to the scientific community. The most immediate delay, the probe called Astro, scheduled to be deployed by Columbia in March. Its target, Halley's Comet. It would have been America's only real look at Halley, bringing the first detailed ultraviolet studies. The point? To learn more about our Earth by learning about other celestial objects. The next scheduled mission, Ulysses, a European spacecraft designed to observe the polar regions of the sun. It would have been launched by Challenger in May and traveled towards Jupiter, where that planet's gravity would hurl it to an orbit around the sun, giving us our first close-up look at the solar flares and magnetic fields around that giant star. Then the Galileo mission, another spacecraft deployed from the shuttle to go into orbit around Jupiter. Its task? To send back high-resolution photographs of the planet, its moons, and its rings, and to send out its own probe to relay the first details about the atmosphere around Jupiter. But the most severe concern revolves around the Space Telescope, the $1.2 billion eye in the sky that's designed to look further out into the universe than ever before.
It will make an enormous increase in our ability to study and to understand the cosmos, probably the largest single increase that's happened since Galileo first looked through his telescope.
Astronomers say the telescope will see details 10 times clearer than from Earth. And this computer projection illustrates that what the best earthbound telescope would see as this, the space telescope would see as this.
All of these things are tied to a timetable determined by celestial mechanics, exactly where the planets are at specific periods of time. And so one doesn't have complete flexibility in delaying or moving these missions around.
That's true of Ulysses and Galileo because Jupiter won't be in the same position for another 13 months, and Halley's Comet won't return for another 76 years. But all the science missions may simply have to wait until the questions about human safety in space are answered. Lynn Scher, ABC News, Johnson Space Center, Houston.
And there is the business side of this as well. While some of the big companies which make parts for the shuttle have other commitments, there are all sorts of smaller companies which must have the shuttle business to stay economically viable. And there are still other companies which have planned on the shuttle for space transportation. Here's our economics editor, Dan Kortz.
Before this week's tragedy, the space shuttle had launched a number of communications satellites for U.S. firms. 3 more companies, Western Union, GTE, and Hughes Aircraft, were scheduled to send satellites aloft on other flights in June and November. But all of them say the delay doesn't concern them. GTE's satellite is intended for its Sprint overseas telephone service, but it will put up 2 others by Europe's Ariane rocket that can handle all its business. Western Union's satellite is for future expansion and isn't needed anytime soon. And the Hughes satellite is for lease to the Navy, not civilian use. In fact, the delay will have only a minor impact on most companies involved in the shuttle program. For the big aerospace companies that build rockets or refurbish the shuttle between flights, the loss of revenue will be small. The entire shuttle program represents only about 3% of the aerospace business. But the big firms subcontract a lot of work to little companies that will feel the pinch. One is the Hecht Rubber Corporation of Jacksonville, Florida, which makes a variety of rubber parts for the shuttle's interior.
Well, right now the orders are still go, but we assume in the days and weeks to come, they probably will be put on hold.
There are an estimated 5,000 to 10,000 such little companies involved in the shuttle program, and most had expected to expand their operations as the program accelerated. Now they'll have to take in their belts. But industry analysts say almost all of them should be able to survive a delay.